In June 2013, Edward Snowden revealed that the US government had been secretly collecting phone records and internet data on millions of its own citizens. Within 24 hours, sales of a book published in 1949 jumped over 6,000% on Amazon. It went from number 11,855 to number 3 in a single day. The book was 1984. And here's what's strange about that. It happened again in 2017, and in 2022, and again in 2025. Every time the world produces a headline that feels impossible, people run to a novel written by a dying man on a Scottish island 70 years ago. Why that book? Why not a history textbook, or a news analysis, or a political essay? Because Orwell had already named it. He had already built the language to describe what was happening before it happened. And he wasn't alone. 3 books did this. Each one identified a different way that power makes itself invisible. And together, they form something close to a complete answer to a question we still haven't figured out. How does freedom disappear without anyone quite deciding to let it go? Animal Farm, 1984, The Handmaid's Tale. This is what they actually say. In the winter of 1943, George Orwell sat down to write a fable about a farm. Not a novel, not a manifesto, a fable, with talking animals. Every major publisher in Britain refused to print it. One dropped it after a government official made a phone call. Another said the pigs were probably right to be running the farm. And there was, later discovered, an actual Soviet spy inside the Ministry of Information, helping keep it off shelves. A spy, to suppress a story about farm animals. That tells you everything about how dangerous Orwell's actual argument was. So what was it? The animals of Manor Farm overthrow their drunken, neglectful owner. Led by the pigs, the most intelligent animals, they build a new society on one founding principle. All animals are equal. Simple, clean, hard to argue with. Here's what happens next, and pay attention because this is the part that's actually about us. The pigs don't seize power through violence. They accumulate it through expertise. They can read. They handle logistics. They manage negotiations. And with expertise comes something more valuable than a weapon: the right to explain. Whenever something goes wrong, Squealer is there. Whenever a promise gets broken, Squealer has a reason. Whenever the rules get quietly revised in the middle of the night, Squealer has figures. Good figures. Logical figures. Ask yourself, when was the last time you accepted an explanation for something that felt wrong? Because the explanation was just complicated enough that pushing back felt like more effort than it was worth. That's Squealer's entire strategy. The commandments get rewritten, one by one, always small, always reasonable, until eventually the 7 commandments become one. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. The revolution didn't fail because the pigs were evil. It failed because the system rewarded those willing to revise the truth incrementally, and had no mechanism to stop them. Squealer is the most important character in the book. Not Napoleon the dictator, the propagandist. Because Napoleon needs force. Squealer doesn't. But Orwell finished Animal Farm and felt it wasn't enough. The animals could still remember. They could still feel that something was wrong. The tools to challenge the system, memory, language, comparison, still existed. Orwell's next question was the most dangerous one he ever asked. What if those tools didn't exist either? Orwell moved to a remote farmhouse on the Scottish island of Jura in 1946 and started writing what would become 1984. He was already ill. The tuberculosis was advancing. By 1947, it had gotten serious enough that he was hospitalized and told to rest. He didn't rest. He went back to Jura and kept writing. When the manuscript was finally done in late 1948, he couldn't find anyone to type it up, so he did it himself. 4,000 words a day, lying in bed, coughing up blood. His doctors believed the effort shortened his life. The book was published in June 1949. Orwell died 7 months later. He finished it anyway. That matters because 1984 isn't a thought experiment. It's an argument Orwell believed was urgent enough to die for. So what's the argument? 1984 picks up exactly where Animal Farm ends and goes further. In Animal Farm, the pigs rewrite history, but the animals can still feel that something is wrong. Orwell's question in 1984 is, what if you couldn't even feel that? The answer is newspeak, the official language of the party, being systematically reduced year by year, edition by edition. The goal isn't to make dissent dangerous, it's to make dissent unthinkable. Here's a test. Try to describe the feeling of political freedom without using the word freedom. It's harder than it sounds, and that's exactly the point. In newspeak, the word freedom still exists, but only in the sense of this field is free of weeds. The concept of political freedom, the idea that a person might have rights the state cannot touch, has no word. And without a word, the thought becomes almost impossible to form. You can feel the absence of something, you just can't name it. And without a name, you can't share it, build on it, or act on it. Winston Smith works at the Ministry of Truth. His job is to correct the historical record, updating old newspaper articles so that the party's past predictions always turn out to have been right. Millions of small falsifications every day by ordinary people doing their jobs. That's the detail that makes 1984 disturbing in a way pure dystopias usually aren't. The system doesn't depend on a handful of evil people at the top. It runs on mass participation. Everyone inside it is, to some degree, complicit. And then there's the ending, which most people misremember. Winston isn't executed. He's sitting in the Chestnut Tree Cafe drinking gin. And in that final moment, after everything the party has put him through, he realizes he genuinely loves Big Brother. No bullet, no execution. What dies is the last piece of his independent self, his nonconformity, his capacity to want something different. The physical death that will follow eventually is almost beside the point. He was finished before it happened. The party's goal was never to kill Winston. It was to make him want to agree. Think about that for a second, because it's the darkest idea in the book. A population that has been genuinely convinced doesn't need to be watched. It watches itself. Here's a question before we get to the third book. Animal Farm shows power corrupting through ideology. 1984 shows power stabilizing through language. Both assume that the oppressed and the oppressors are separate groups, that the system imposes itself from outside. What if it doesn't? Margaret Atwood started writing The Handmaid's Tale in 1984, in West Berlin, looking out at the wall. She had one rule: nothing in the book could be invented. Every element of the Republic of Gilead had to have a documented precedent in actual history. She kept newspaper clippings, brought them to interviews. Her sources included the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, which dismantled women's rights that had been expanding for decades almost overnight. Romania under Ceausescu, where the state controlled pregnancy and outlawed abortion to increase the birth rate. The Philippines under Marcos. The rise of the religious right in 1980s America. Atwood wasn't imagining what might happen. She was assembling what had already happened, from different places, different times, different regimes, and concentrating it into one story. So what did she find? The Handmaid's Tale shows something subtler than either Orwell book. Power perpetuating itself by recruiting the people it oppresses. The ants, women who train, surveil, and punish the handmaids, are the system's most efficient component. They're not anomalies or traitors. They're a logical product of a system that offers some women marginal safety in exchange for enforcing rules on all women. Gilead doesn't need to convince everyone. It only needs to convince enough. Offred, the narrator, is not a rebel. She's a calculator. She complies not from belief, but from cold assessment of her options. And this, Atwood suggests, is how most people actually behave under oppression. Not as ideological opponents quietly plotting resistance, as ordinary people making ordinary daily compromises, until the compromises have become the shape of their life. Ask yourself honestly, at what point does adapting to a bad system become participating in it? That's the question Offred lives inside, and never fully answers. The religious justification is what sets Gilead apart from both Oceania and Animal Farm. Divine mandate is more dangerous than political ideology, because once it's established, challenging it doesn't feel like political opposition. It feels like moral failure. Resistance becomes sacrilege. Atwood references Iran directly in the book. In the historical notes at the end, a future historian mentions Iran and Gilead, two late 20th century monotheocracies. Before 1979, Iranian women had been gaining rights for decades. Then, within months of the new government, those rights were gone. And some of the women who had marched in the revolution found themselves subject to the very restrictions they had helped impose. The pattern, a movement that promises liberation and delivers hierarchy, isn't specific to any religion or culture or century. It appears wherever ideological certainty allows the question of who actually ends up holding power to go unanswered. So, which of these three mechanisms is the most dangerous? Animal Farm. Power rebrands itself, using the language of the revolution to justify its opposite, one small revision at a time, with a good explanation for each one. 1984. Power makes itself unthinkable, narrowing the language available to challenge it until resistance has no words to travel on. The Handmaid's Tale. Power recruits its victims, offering enough of the oppressed a slightly better position in exchange for enforcing the system on everyone else. The honest answer is that they're not competing mechanisms. They work together. Squealer provides the explanations. Newspeak removes the vocabulary to question them. And the ants make sure that even the people most harmed by the system help maintain it. And here's what connects all three at the root. None of them rely primarily on violence. Violence is expensive, it's visible, it creates martyrs. The most stable forms of control are the ones that feel inevitable, or better, feel like something the people inside them have chosen. Which brings us back to 2013. When Snowden's revelations broke, people didn't reach for a news article, they reached for a novel. Because Orwell had already named what was happening, had already built the language for a surveillance system so normalized that the people inside it barely noticed. That's what these three books actually are. Not prophecies, not warnings exactly. They're a vocabulary. A set of words precise enough that when reality catches up, you already have the tools to see it clearly. Orwell typed the final manuscript of 1984 in bed, coughing up blood, because he believed it needed to exist. Atwood assembled The Handmaid's Tale from newspaper clippings, because her point wasn't that this could happen, it had happened. It was happening, under different names, in different places, with different explanations. The question all three books keep returning to isn't whether systems like this are possible, it's why the people inside them so often fail to see what's happening until it's already finished. The answer across all three is the same. The system doesn't announce itself. It arrives with explanations, with reasons, with someone like Squealer telling you very calmly and with figures to back it up that your memory is simply wrong.